who lie prostrate there before the hills, like pilgrims come at last to their journey's end. The silence of the landscape was broken by the even rhythm of the strokes of the oar. It seemed to find a voice for the place, in monotonous cadences like the chanting of monks. The Marquise was surprised to find visitors to this usually lonely part of the lake, and as he mused, he watched the people seated in the boat, and recognized in the stern the elderly lady who had spoken so harshly to him the evening before. No one took any notice of Raphael as the boat passed, except the elderly lady's companion, a poor old maid of noble family, who bowed to him, and whom it seemed to him that he saw for the first time. A few seconds later he had already forgotten the visitors, who had rapidly disappeared behind the promontory, when he heard the fluttering of a dress and the sound of light footsteps not far from him. He turned about and saw the companion, and, guessing from her embarrassed manner that she wished to speak with him, he walked towards her. She was somewhere about 36 years of age, thin and tall, reserved and prim, and, like all old maids, seemed puzzled to know which way to look, an expression no longer in keeping with her measured, springless, and hesitating steps. She was both young and old at the same time, and, by a certain dignity in her carriage, showed the high value which she set upon her charms and perfections. In addition, her movements were all demure and discreet, like those of women who are accustomed to take great care of themselves, no doubt because they desire not to be cheated of love, their destined end. "Your life is in danger, sir. Do not come to the club again," she said, stepping back a pace or two from Raphael, as if her reputation had already been compromised. "But, mademoiselle," said Raphael, smiling, "please explain yourself more clearly, since you have condescended so far." She answered, "Unless I had had a very strong motive, I should never have run the risk of offending the Countess. For if she ever came to know that I had warned you, and who would tell her, mademoiselle?" cried Raphael. "True," the old maid answered. She looked at him, quaking like an owl out in the sunlight. "But think of yourself," she went on, "several young men, who want to drive you away from the baths, have agreed to pick a quarrel with you, and to force you into a duel." The elderly lady's voice sounded in the distance. "Mademoiselle," began the Marquise, "my gratitude," but his protectress had fled already. She had heard the voice of her mistress squeaking afresh among the rocks. Poor girl, unhappiness always understands and helps the unhappy, Raphael thought, and sat himself down at the foot of a tree. The key of every science is, beyond cavil, the mark of interrogation. We owe most of our greatest discoveries to a why. And all the wisdom in the world, perhaps, consists in asking wherefore. In every connection. But, on the other hand, this acquired prescience is the ruin of our illusions. So Valentin, having taken the old maid's kindly action for the text of his wandering thoughts, without the deliberate promptings of philosophy, must find it full of gall and wormwood. "It is not at all extraordinary that a gentlewoman's gentlewoman should take a fancy to me," said he to himself. "I am 27 years old, and I have a title and an income of 200,000 a year. But that her mistress, who hates water like a rabid cat, for it would be hard to give the palm to either in that matter, that her mistress should have brought her here in a boat. Is not that very strange and wonderful? Those two women came into Savoy to sleep like marmots. They ask if day has dawned at noon, and to think that they could get up this morning before 8 o'clock, to take their chances in running after me. Very soon the old maid and her elderly innocence became, in his eyes, a fresh manifestation of that artificial, malicious little world. It was a paltry device, a clumsy artifice, a piece of priest's or woman's craft. Was the duel a myth, or did they merely want to frighten him? But these petty creatures, impudent and teasing as flies, had succeeded in wounding his vanity, in rousing his pride, and exciting his curiosity. Unwilling to become their dupe, or to be taken for a coward, and even diverted perhaps by the little drama, he went to the club that very evening. He stood leaning against the marble chimney-piece, and stayed there quietly in the middle of the principal saloon, doing his best to give no one any advantage over him, but he scrutinized the faces about him, and gave a certain vague offense to those assembled, by his inspection. Like a dog aware of his strength, he awaited the contest on his own ground, without necessary barking. Towards the end of the evening he strolled into the card-room, walking between the door and another that opened into the billiard-room, throwing a glance from time to time over a group of young men that had gathered there. He heard his name mentioned after a turn or two. Although they lowered their voices, Raphael easily guessed that he had become the topic of their debate, and he ended by catching a phrase or two spoken aloud. "You." "Yes, I dare you to do it. Let us make a bet on it." "Oh, he will do it." Just as Valentin, curious to learn the matter of the wager, came up to pay closer attention to what they were saying, a tall, strong, good-looking young fellow, who, however, possessed the impertinent stare peculiar to people who have material force at their back, came out of the billiard-room. "I am deputed, sir," he said coolly addressing the Marquise, "to make you aware of something which you do not seem to know. Your face and person generally are a source of annoyance to everyone here, and to me in particular. You have too much politeness not to sacrifice yourself to the public good, and I beg that you will not show yourself in the club again. This sort of joke has been perpetrated before, sir, in garrison towns at the time of the Empire, but nowadays it is exceedingly bad form," said Raphael dryly. "I am not joking," the young man answered, "and I repeat it, your health will be considerably the worse for a stay here. The heat and light, the air of the saloon, and the company are all bad for your complaint." "Where did you study medicine?" Raphael inquired. "I took my bachelor's degree on Lepage shooting ground in Paris, and was made a doctor at Cerizier's, the king of foils." "There is one last degree left for you to take," said Valentin. "Study the ordinary rules of politeness, and you will be a perfect gentleman." The young men all came out of the billiard room just then, some disposed to laugh, some silent. The attention of other players was drawn to the matter. They left their cards to watch a quarrel that rejoiced their instincts. Raphael, alone among this hostile crowd, did his best to keep cool, and not to put himself in any way in the wrong, but his adversary having ventured a sarcasm containing an insult couched in unusually keen language, he replied gravely, "We cannot box men's ears, sir, in these days, but I am at a loss for any word by which to stigmatize such cowardly behavior as yours." "That's enough, that's enough. You can come to an explanation tomorrow," several young men exclaimed, interposing between the two champions. Raphael left the room in the character of aggressor, after he had accepted a proposal to meet near the Château de Bordeaux, in a little sloping meadow, not very far from the newly made road, by which the man who came off victorious could reach Lyons. Raphael must now either take to his bed or leave the baths. The visitors had gained their point. At 8 o'clock next morning his antagonist, followed by 2 seconds and a surgeon, arrived first on the ground. "We shall do very nicely here, glorious weather for a duel," he cried gaily, looking at the blue vault of sky above, at the waters of the lake, and the rocks, without a single melancholy presentiment or doubt of the issue. "If I wing him," he went on, "I shall send him to bed for a month, doctor?" "At the very least," the surgeon replied, "but let that willow twig alone, or you will weary your wrist, and then you will not fire steadily. You might kill your man instead of wounding him." The noise of a carriage was heard approaching. "Here he is," said the seconds, who soon descried a calash coming along the road. It was drawn by 4 horses, and there were 2 postilions. "What a queer proceeding," said Valentin's antagonist, "here he comes post haste to be shot." The slightest incident about a duel, as about a stake at cards, makes an impression on the minds of those deeply concerned in the results of the affair, so the young man awaited the arrival of the carriage with a kind of uneasiness. It stopped in the road. Old Jonathan laboriously descended from it. In the first place, to assist Raphael to alight, he supported him with his feeble arms, and showed him all the minute attentions that a lover lavishes upon his mistress. Both became lost to sight in the footpath that lay between the highroad and the field where the duel was to take place. They were walking slowly, and did not appear again for some time after. The 4 onlookers at this strange spectacle felt deeply moved by the sight of Valentin as he leaned on his servant's arm. He was wasted and pale, he limped as if he had the gout, went with his head bowed down, and said not a word. You might have taken them for a couple of old men, one broken with years, the other worn out with thought. The elder bore his age visibly written in his white hair, the younger was of no age. "I have not slept all night, sir," so Raphael greeted his antagonist. The icy tone and terrible glance that went with the words made the real aggressor shudder. He knew that he was in the wrong, and felt in secret ashamed of his behavior. There was something strange in Raphael's bearing, tone, and gesture. The Marquise stopped, and everyone else was likewise silent. The uneasy and constrained feeling grew to a height. "There is yet time," he went on, "to offer me some slight apology, and offer it you must, or you will die, sir. You rely even now on your dexterity, and do not shrink from an encounter in which you believe all the advantage to be upon your side. Very good, sir, I am generous. I am letting you know my superiority beforehand. I possess a terrible power. I have only to wish to do so, and I can neutralize your skill, dim your eyesight, make your hand and pulse unsteady, and even kill you outright. I have no wish to be compelled to exercise my power, the use of it costs me too dear. You would not be the only one to die. So if you refuse to apologize to me, not matter what your experience in murder, your ball will go into the waterfall there, and mine will speed straight to your heart though I do not aim it at you. Confused voices interrupted Raphael at this point. All the time that he was speaking, the Marquis had kept his intolerably keen gaze fixed upon his antagonist. Now he drew himself up and showed an impassive face, like that of a dangerous madman. Make him hold his tongue, the young man had said to one of his seconds. That voice of his is tearing the heart out of me. Say no more, sir, it is quite useless, cried the seconds and the surgeon, addressing Raphael. Gentlemen, I am fulfilling a duty. Has this young gentleman any final arrangements to make? That is enough, that will do. The Marquis remained standing steadily, never for a moment losing sight of his antagonist, and the latter seemed, like a bird before a snake, to be overwhelmed by a well-nigh magical power. He was compelled to endure that homicidal gaze, he met and shunned it incessantly. I am thirsty, give me some water, he said again to the second. Are you nervous? Yes, he answered. There is a fascination about that man's glowing eyes. Will you apologize? It is too late now. The two antagonists were placed at 15 paces distance from each other. Each of them had a brace of pistols at hand, and, according to the program prescribed for them, each was to fire twice when and how he pleased, but after the signal had been given by the seconds. What are you doing, Charles? Exclaimed the young man who acted as second to Raphael's antagonist. You are putting in the ball before the powder. I am a dead man, he muttered, by way of answer. You have put me facing the sun. The sun lies behind you, said Valentin sternly and solemnly, while he coolly loaded his pistol without heeding the fact that the signal had been given, or that his antagonist was carefully taking aim. There was something so appalling in this supernatural unconcern, that it affected even the two postilions, brought thither by a cruel curiosity. Raphael was either trying his power or playing with it, for he talked to Jonathan, and looked towards him as he received his adversary's fire. Charles' bullet broke a branch of willow, and ricocheted over the surface of the water. Raphael fired at random, and shot his antagonist through the heart. He did not heed the young man as he dropped. He hurriedly sought the magic skin to see what another man's life had cost him. The talisman was no larger than a small oak leaf. What are you gaping at, you postilions over there? Let us be off, said the Marquis. That same evening he crossed the French border, immediately set out for Orphan, and reached the springs of Morndor. As he traveled, there surged up in his heart, all at once, one of those thoughts that come to us as a ray of sunlight pierces through the thick mists in some dark valley, a sad enlightenment, a pitiless sagacity that lights up the accomplished fact for us, that lays our errors bare, and leaves us without excuse in our own eyes. It suddenly struck him that the possession of power, no matter how enormous, did not bring with it the knowledge how to use it. The scepter is a plaything for a child, an axe for a Richelieu, and for a Napoleon a lever by which to move the world. Power leaves us just as it finds us, only great natures grow greater by its means. Raphael had had everything in his power, and he had done nothing. At the springs of Morndor he came again in contact with a little world of people, who invariably shunned him with the eager haste that animals display when they scent afar off one of their own species lying dead, and flee away. The dislike was mutual. His late adventure had given him a deep distaste for society. His first care, consequently, was to find a lodging at some distance from the neighborhood of the springs. Instinctively he felt within him the need of close contact with nature, of natural emotions, and of the vegetative life into which we sink so gladly among the fields. The day after he arrived he climbed the Pic de Sancy, not without difficulty, and visited the higher valleys, the skyey nooks, undiscovered lakes, and peasants' huts about Morndor, a country whose stern and wild features are now beginning to tempt the brushes of our artists, for sometimes wonderfully fresh and charming views are to be found there, affording a strong contrast to the frowning brows of those lonely hills. Barely a league from the village Raphael discovered a nook where nature seemed to have taken a pleasure in hiding away all her treasures like some glad and mischievous child. At the first sight of this unspoiled and picturesque retreat, he determined to take up his abode in it. There, life must needs be peaceful, natural, and fruitful, like the life of a plant. Imagine for yourself an inverted cone of granite hollowed out on a large scale, a sort of basin with its sides divided up by queer winding paths. On one side lay level stretches with no growth upon them, a bluish uniform surface, over which the rays of the sun fell as upon a mirror. On the other lay cliffs split open by fissures and frowning ravines. Great blocks of lava hung suspended from them, while the action of rain slowly prepared their impending fall. A few stunted trees tormented by the wind, often crowned their summits, and here and there in some sheltered angle of their ramparts a clump of chestnut trees grew tall as cedars, or some cavern in the yellowish rocks showed the dark entrance into its depths, set about by flowers and brambles, decked by a little strip of green turf. At the bottom of this cup, which perhaps had been the crater of an old-world volcano, lay a pool of water as pure and bright as a diamond. Granite boulders lay around the deep basin, and willows, mountain ash trees, yellow flag lilies, and numberless aromatic plants bloomed about it, in a realm of meadow as fresh as an English bowling green. The fine soft grass was watered by the streams that trickled through the fissures in the cliffs. The soil was continually enriched by the deposits of loam which storms washed down from the heights above. The pool might be some 3 acres in extent, its shape was irregular, and the edges were scalloped like the hem of a dress. The meadow might be an acre or 2 acres in extent. The cliffs and the water approached and receded from each other. Here and there was scarcely width enough for the cows to pass between them. After a certain height the plant life ceased. Aloft in air the granite took upon itself the most fantastic shapes, and assumed those misty tints that give to high mountains a dim resemblance to clouds in the sky. The bare, bleak cliffs, with the fearful rents in their sides, pictures of wild and barren desolation, contrasted strongly with the pretty view of the valley, and so strange were the shapes they assumed, that one of the cliffs had been called the Capuchin because it was so like a monk. Sometimes these sharp-pointed peaks, these mighty masses of rock, and airy caverns were lighted up one by one, according to the direction of the sun or the caprices of the atmosphere. They caught gleams of gold, dyed themselves in purple, took a tint of glowing rose color, or turned dull and gray. Upon the heights a drama of color was always to be seen, a play of ever-shifting iridescent hues like those on a pigeon's breast. Oftentimes at sunrise or at sunset a ray of bright sunlight would penetrate between 2 sheer surfaces of lava, that might have been split apart by a hatchet, to the very depths of that pleasant little garden, where it would play in the waters of the pool, like a beam of golden light which gleams through the chinks of a shutter into a room in Spain that has been carefully darkened for a siesta. When the sun rose above the old crater that some antediluvian revolution had filled with water, its rocky sides took warmer tones, the extinct volcano glowed again, and its sudden heat quickened the sprouting seeds and vegetation, gave color to the flowers, and ripened the fruits of this forgotten corner of the earth. As Raphael reached it, he noticed several cows grazing in the pasture land, and when he had taken a few steps towards the water, he saw a little house built of granite and roofed with shingle in the spot where the meadowland was at its widest. The roof of this little cottage harmonized with everything about it, for it had long been overgrown with ivy, moss, and flowers of no recent date. A thin smoke, that did not scare the birds away, went up from the dilapidated chimney. There was a great bench at the door between 2 huge honeysuckle bushes, that were pink with blossom and full of scent. The walls could scarcely be seen for branches of vine and sprays of rose and jessamine that interlaced and grew entirely as chance and their own will bade them, for the inmates of the cottage seemed to pay no attention to the growth which adorned their house, and to take no care of it, leaving to it the fresh capricious charm of nature. Some clothes spread out on the gooseberry bushes were drying in the sun. A cat was sitting on a machine for stripping hemp. Beneath it lay a newly scoured brass cauldron, among a quantity of potato parings. On the other side of the house Raphael saw a sort of barricade of dead thorn bushes, meant no doubt to keep the poultry from scratching up the vegetables and pot herbs. It seemed like the end of the earth. The dwelling was like some bird's nest ingeniously set in a cranny of the rocks, a clever and at the same time a careless bit of workmanship. A simple and kindly nature lay round about it, its rusticity was genuine, but there was a charm like that of poetry in it, for it grew and throve at 1,000 miles distance from our elaborate and conventional poetry. It was like none of our conceptions, it was a spontaneous growth, a masterpiece due to chance. As Raphael reached the place, the sunlight fell across it from right to left, bringing out all the colors of its plants and trees, the yellowish or gray bases of the crags, the different shades of the green leaves, the masses of flowers, pink, blue, or white, the climbing plants with their bell-like blossoms, and the shot velvet of the mosses, the purple-tinted blooms of the heather. Everything was either brought into relief or made fairer yet by the enchantment of the light or by the contrasting shadows, and this was the case most of all with the sheet of water, wherein the house, the trees, the granite peaks, and the sky were all faithfully reflected. Everything had a radiance of its own in this delightful picture, from the sparkling mica stone to the bleached tuft of grass hidden away in the soft shadows, the spotted cow with its glossy hide, the delicate water plants that hung down over the pool like fringes in a nook where blue or emerald-colored insects were buzzing about, the roots of trees like a sand-besprinkled shock of hair above grotesque faces in the flinty rock surface. All these things made a harmony for the eye. The odor of the tepid water, the scent of the flowers, and the breath of the caverns which filled the lonely place gave Raphael a sensation that was almost enjoyment. Silence reigned in majesty over these woods, which possibly are unknown to the tax collector, but the barking of a couple of dogs broke the stillness all at once. The cows turned their heads towards the entrance of the valley, showing their moist noses to Raphael, stared stupidly at him, and then fell to browsing again. A goat and her kid, that seemed to hang on the side of the crags in some magical fashion, capered and leapt to a slab of granite near to Raphael, and stayed there a moment, as if to seek to know who he was. The yapping of the dogs brought out a plump child, who stood agape, and next came a white-haired old man of middle height. Both of these two beings were in keeping with the surroundings, the air, the flowers, and the dwelling. Health appeared to overflow in this fertile region, old age and childhood thrived there. There seemed to be, about all these types of existence, the freedom and carelessness of the life of primitive times, a happiness of use and wont that gave the lie to our philosophical platitudes, and wrought a cure of all its swelling passions in the heart. The old man belonged to the type of model dear to the masculine brush of Schnees. The countless wrinkles upon his brown face looked as if they would be hard to the touch, the straight nose, the prominent cheekbones, streaked with red veins like a vine leaf in autumn, the angular features, all were characteristics of strength, even where strength existed no longer. The hard hands, now that they toiled no longer, had preserved their scanty white hair. His bearing was that of an absolutely free man. It suggested the thought that, had he been an Italian, he would have perhaps turned brigand, for the love of the liberty so dear to him. The child was a regular mountaineer, with the black eyes that can face the sun without flinching, a deeply tanned complexion, and rough brown hair. His movements were like a bird's, swift, decided, and unconstrained. His clothing was ragged, the white, fair skin showed through the rents in his garments. There they both stood in silence, side by side, both obeying the same impulse. In both faces were clear tokens of an absolutely identical and idle life. The old man had adopted the child's amusements, and the child had fallen in with the old man's humor. There was a sort of tacit agreement between two kinds of feebleness, between failing powers well nigh spent and powers just about to unfold themselves. Very soon a woman who seemed to be about 30 years old appeared on the threshold of the door, spinning as she came. She was an orphanate, a high-colored, comfortable-looking, straightforward sort of person, with white teeth. Her cap and dress, the face, full figure, and general appearance, were of the orphan peasant stamp. So was her dialect. She was a thorough embodiment of her district, its hard-working ways, its thrift, ignorance, and heartiness all met in her. She greeted Raphael, and they began to talk. The dogs quieted down. The old man went and sat on a bench in the sun. The child followed his mother about wherever she went, listening without saying a word, and staring at the stranger. "You are not afraid to live here, good woman?" "What should we be afraid of, sir? When we bolt the door, whoever could get inside?" "Oh, no, we aren't afraid at all. And besides," she said, as she brought the marquise into the principal room in the house, "what should thieves come to take from us here?" She designated the room as she spoke, the smoke-blackened walls, with some brilliant pictures in blue, red, and green, an end of credit, a crucifixion, and the grenadiers of the Imperial Guard for their sole ornament, the furniture here and there, the old wooden four-post bedstead, the table with crooked legs, a few stools, the chest that held the bread, the flitch that hung from the ceiling, a jar of salt, a stove, and on the mantel-shelf a few discolored yellow plaster figures. As he went out again, Raphael noticed a man halfway up the crags, leaning on a hoe, and watching the house with interest. "That's my man, sir," said the orphanate, unconsciously smiling in peasant fashion. "He is at work up there." "And that old man is your father?" "Asking your pardon, sir, he is my man's grandfather. Such as you see him, he is 102, and yet quite lately he walked over to Claremont with our little chap. Oh, he has been a strong man in his time, but he does nothing now but sleep and eat and drink. He amuses himself with the little fellow. Sometimes the child trails him up the hillsides, and he will just go up there along with him." Valentin made up his mind immediately. He would live between this child and old man, breathe the same air, eat their bread, drink the same water, sleep with them, make the blood in his veins like theirs. It was a dying man's fancy. For him the prime model, after which the customary existence of the individual should be shaped, the real formula for the life of a human being, the only true and possible life, the life ideal, was to become one of the oysters adhering to this rock, to save his shell a day or two longer by paralyzing the power of death. One profoundly selfish thought took possession of him, and the whole universe was swallowed up and lost in it. For him the universe existed no longer, the whole world had come to be within himself. For the sick, The world begins at their pillow and ends at the foot of the bed, and this countryside was Raphael's sick bed. Who has not, at some time or other in his life, watched the comings and goings of an ant, slipped straws into a yellow slug's one breathing hole, studied the vagaries of a slender dragonfly, pondered admiringly over the countless veins in an oak leaf, that bring the colors of a rose window in some Gothic cathedral into contrast with the reddish background? Who has not looked long in delight at the effects of sun and rain on a roof of brown tiles, at the dewdrops, or at the variously shaped petals of the flower cups? Who has not sunk into these idle, absorbing meditations on things without, that have no conscious end, yet lead to some definite thought at last? Who, in short, has not led a lazy life, the life of childhood, the life of the savage without his labor? This life without a care or a wish Raphael led for some days' space. He felt a distinct improvement in his condition, a wonderful sense of ease, that quieted his apprehensions and soothed his sufferings. He would climb the crags, and then find a seat high up on some peak whence he could see a vast expanse of distant country at a glance, and he would spend whole days in this way, like a plant in the sun, or a hair in its form. And at last, growing familiar with the appearances of the plant life about him, and of the changes in the sky, he minutely noted the progress of everything working around him in the water, on the earth, or in the air. He tried to share the secret impulses of nature, sought by passive obedience to become a part of it, and to lie within the conservative and despotic jurisdiction that regulates instinctive existence. He no longer wished to steer his own course. Just as criminals in olden times were safe from the pursuit of justice, if they took refuge under the shadow of the altar, so Raphael made an effort to slip into the sanctuary of life. He succeeded in becoming an integral part of the great and mighty fruit-producing organization. He had adapted himself to the inclemency of the air, and had dwelt in every cave among the rocks. He had learned the ways and habits of growth of every plant, had studied the laws of the watercourses and their beds, and had come to know the animals. He was at last so perfectly at one with this teeming earth, that he had in some sort discerned its mysteries and caught the spirit of it. The infinitely varied forms of every natural kingdom were, to his thinking, only developments of one and the same substance, different combinations brought about by the same impulse, endless emanations from a measureless being which was acting, thinking, moving, and growing, and in harmony with which he longed to grow, to move, to think, and act. He had fancifully blended his life with the life of the crags. He had deliberately planted himself there. During the earliest days of his sojourn in these pleasant surroundings, Valentin tasted all the pleasures of childhood again, thanks to the strange hallucination of apparent convalescence, which is not unlike the pauses of delirium that nature mercifully provides for those in pain. He went about making trifling discoveries, setting to work on endless things, and finishing none of them. The evening's plans were quite forgotten in the morning. He had no cares, he was happy, he thought himself saved. One morning he had lain in bed till noon, deep in the dreams between sleep and waking, which give to realities a fantastic appearance, and make the wildest fancies seem solid facts. While he was still uncertain that he was not dreaming yet, he suddenly heard his hostess giving a report of his health to Jonathan, for the first time. Jonathan came to inquire after him daily, and the orphanate, thinking no doubt that Valentine was still asleep, had not lowered the tones of a voice developed in mountain air. "No better and no worse," she said. "He coughed all last night, again fit to kill himself. Poor gentleman, he coughs and spits till it is piteous. My husband and I often wonder to each other where he gets the strength from to cough like that. It goes to your heart. What a cursed complaint it is. He has no strength at all. I am always afraid I shall find him dead in his bed some morning. He is every bit as pale as a waxen Christ. Dame. I watch him while he dresses, his poor body is as thin as a nail. And he does not feel well now, but no matter. It's all the same. He wears himself out with running about as if he had health and to spare. All the same, he is very brave, for he never complains at all. But really he would be better under the earth than on it, for he is enduring the agonies of Christ. I don't wish that myself, sir. It is quite in our interests. But even if he didn't pay us what he does, I should be just as fond of him. It is not our own interest that is our motive. Ah, mon Dieu, she continued, Parisians are the people for these dogs' diseases. Where did he catch it, now? Poor young man. And he is so sure that he is going to get well. That fever just gnaws him, you know, it eats him away, it will be the death of him. He has no notion whatever of that, he does not know it, sir, he sees nothing. You mustn't cry about him, Jonathan, you must remember that he will be happy, and will not suffer any more. You ought to make a neuvaine for him. I have seen wonderful cures come of the 9 days' prayer, and I would gladly pay for a wax taper to save such a gentle creature, so good he is, a paschal lamb. As Raphael's voice had grown too weak to allow him to make himself heard, he was compelled to listen to this horrible loquacity. His irritation, however, drove him out of bed at length, and he appeared upon the threshold. "Old scoundrel," he shouted to Jonathan, "do you mean to put me to death?" The peasant woman took him for a ghost, and fled. "I forbid you to have any anxiety whatever about my health," Raphael went on. "Yes, my lord Marquis," said the old servant, wiping away his tears. "And for the future you had very much better not come here without my orders." Jonathan meant to be obedient, but in the look full of pity and devotion that he gave the Marquise before he went, Raphael read his own death warrant. Utterly disheartened, brought all at once to a sense of his real position, Valentine sat down on the threshold, locked his arms across his chest, and bowed his head. Jonathan turned to his master in alarm. "With my lord, go away, cried the invalid. In the hours of the next morning, Raphael climbed the crags, and sat down in a mossy cleft in the rocks, whence he could see the narrow path along which the water for the dwelling was carried. At the base of the hill he saw Jonathan in conversation with the orphanate. Some malicious power interpreted for him all the woman's forebodings, and filled the breeze and the silence with her ominous words. Thrilled with horror, he took refuge among the highest summits of the mountains, and stayed there till the evening, but yet he could not drive away the gloomy presentiments awakened within him in such an unfortunate manner by a cruel solicitude on his account. The orphan peasant herself suddenly appeared before him like a shadow in the dusk. A perverse freak of the poet within him found a vague resemblance between her black and white striped petticoat and the bony frame of a spectre. "The damp is falling now, sir," said she. "If you stop out there, you will go off just like rotten fruit. You must come in. It isn't healthy to breathe the damp, and you have taken nothing since the morning, besides. Tonnerre de Dieu, old witch," he cried, "let me live after my own fashion, I tell you, or I shall be off altogether. It is quite bad enough to dig my grave every morning, you might let it alone in the evenings at least. Your grave, sir. I dig your grave, and where may your grave be? I want to see you as old as father there, and not in your grave by any manner of means. The grave. That comes soon enough for us all, in the grave, that is enough," said Raphael. "Take my arm, sir. No, the feeling of pity in others is very difficult for a man to bear, and it is hardest of all when the pity is deserved. Hatred is a tonic, it quickens life and stimulates revenge, but pity is death to us, it makes our weakness weaker still. It is as if distress simpered ingratiatingly at us, contempt lurks in the tenderness, or tenderness in an affront." In the centenarian Raphael saw triumphant pity, a wondering pity in the child's eyes, an officious pity in the woman, and in her husband a pity that had an interested motive. But no matter how the sentiment declared itself, death was always its import. A poet makes a poem of everything. It is tragical or joyful, as things happen to strike his imagination. His lofty soul rejects all half-tones, he always prefers vivid and decided colors. In Raphael's soul this compassion produced a terrible poem of mourning and melancholy. When he had wished to live in close contact with nature, he had of course forgotten how freely natural emotions are expressed. He would think himself quite alone under a tree, whilst he struggled with an obstinate coughing fit, a terrible combat from which he never issued victorious without utter exhaustion afterwards, and then he would meet the clear, bright eyes of the little boy, who occupied the post of sentinel. Like a savage in a bent of grass, the eyes scrutinized him with a childish wonder, in which there was as much amusement as pleasure, and an indescribable mixture of indifference and interest. The awful brother, "You must die," of the Trappists seemed constantly legible in the eyes of the peasants with whom Raphael was living. He scarcely knew which he dreaded most. Their unfettered talk or their silence, their presence became torture. One morning he saw two men in black prowling about in his neighborhood, who furtively studied him and took observations. They made as though they had come there for a stroll, and asked him a few indifferent questions, to which he returned short answers. He recognized them both. One was the cure and the other the doctor at the springs. Jonathan had no doubt sent them, or the people in the house had called them in, or the scent of an approaching death had drawn them thither. He beheld his own funeral, heard the chanting of the priests, and counted the tall wax candles, and all that lovely fertile nature around him, in whose lap he had thought to find life once more, he saw no longer, save through a veil of crape. Everything that but lately had spoken of length of days to him, now prophesied a speedy end. He set out the next day for Paris, not before he had been inundated with cordial wishes, which the people of the house uttered in melancholy and wistful tones for his benefit. He travelled through the night, and awoke as they passed through one of the pleasant valleys of the Bourbonnais. View after view swam before his gaze, and passed rapidly away like the vague pictures of a dream. Cruel nature spread herself out before his eyes with tantalizing grace. Sometimes the Allier, a liquid shining ribbon, meandered through the distant fertile landscape, then followed the steeples of hamlets, hiding modestly in the depths of a ravine with its yellow cliffs. Sometimes, after the monotony of vineyards, the water-mills of a little valley would be suddenly seen, and everywhere there were pleasant chateaux, hillside villages, roads with their fringes of queenly poplars, and the Loire itself, at last, with its wide sheets of water sparkling like diamonds amid its golden sands. Attractions everywhere, without end. This nature, all astir with a life and gladness like that of childhood, scarcely able to contain the impulses and sap of June, possessed a fatal attraction for the darkened gaze of the invalid. He drew the blinds of his carriage windows, and betook himself again to slumber. Towards evening, after they had passed Cesson, he was awakened by lively music, and found himself confronted with a village fair. The horses were changed near the market-place. Whilst the postilions were engaged in making the transfer, he saw the people dancing merrily, pretty and attractive girls with flowers about them, excited youths, and finally the jolly wine-flushed countenances of old peasants. Children prattled, old women laughed and chatted, everything spoke in one voice, and there was a holiday gaiety about everything, down to their clothing and the tables that were set out. A cheerful expression pervaded the square and the church, the roofs and windows, even the very doorways of the village seemed likewise to be in holiday trim. Raphael could not repress an angry exclamation, nor yet a wish to silence the fiddles, annihilate the stir and bustle, stop the clamor, and disperse the ill-timed festival. Like a dying man, he felt unable to endure the slightest sound, and he entered his carriage much annoyed. When he looked out upon the square from the window, he saw that all the happiness was scared away, the peasant women were in flight, and the benches were deserted. Only a blind musician, on the scaffolding of the orchestra, went on playing a shrill tune on his clarionet. That piping of his, without dancers to it, and the solitary old man himself, in the shadow of the lime tree, with his curmudgeon's face, scanty hair, and ragged clothing, was like a fantastic picture of Raphael's wish. The heavy rain was pouring in torrents. It was one of those thunderstorms that June brings about so rapidly, to cease as suddenly. The thing was so natural, that, when Raphael had looked out and seen some pale clouds driven over by a gust of wind, he did not think of looking at the piece of skin. He lay back again in the corner of his carriage, which was very soon rolling upon its way. The next day found him back in his home again, in his own room, beside his own fireside. He had had a large fire lighted. He felt cold. Jonathan brought him some letters. They were all from Pauline. He opened the first one without any eagerness, and unfolded it as if it had been the grey paper form of application for taxes made by the revenue collector. He read the first sentence, "Gone. This really is a flight, my Raphael. How is it? No one can tell me where you are. And who should know if not I?" He did not wish to learn any more. He calmly took up the letters and threw them in the fire, watching with dull and lifeless eyes the perfumed paper as it was twisted, shriveled, bent, and devoured by the capricious flames. Fragments that fell among the ashes allowed him to see the beginning of a sentence, or a half-burnt thought or word. He took a pleasure in deciphering them, a sort of mechanical amusement. Sitting at your door, expected, caprice, I obey, rivals, I, never, thy Pauline, love, no more of Pauline. If you had wished to leave me forever, you would not have deserted me, love eternal, to die. The words caused him a sort of remorse. He seized the tongs, and rescued a last fragment of the letter from the flames. I have murmured, so Pauline wrote, but I have never complained, my Raphael. If you have left me so far behind you, it was doubtless because you wished to hide some heavy grief from me. Perhaps you will kill me one of these days, but you are too good to torture me. So do not go away from me like this. There. I can bear the worst of torment, if only I am at your side. Any grief that you could cause me would not be grief. There is far more love in my heart for you than I have ever yet shown you. I can endure anything, except this weeping far away from you, this ignorance of your. Raphael laid the scorched scrap on the mantelpiece, then all at once he flung it into the fire. The bit of paper was too clearly a symbol of his own love and luckless existence. Go and find Bianchon, he told Jonathan. Horace came and found Raphael in bed. Can you prescribe a draught for me? Some mild opiate which will always keep me in a somnolent condition, a draught that will not be injurious although taken constantly. Nothing is easier, the young doctor replied, but you will have to keep on your feet for a few hours daily, at any rate, so as to take your food. A few hours. Raphael broke in, no, no. I only wish to be out of bed for an hour at most. What is your object? Inquired Bianchon. To sleep, for so one keeps alive, at any rate, the patient answered. Let no one come in, not even Mademoiselle Pauline de Wischnow, he added to Jonathan, as the doctor was writing out his prescription. Well, Horace, is there any hope? The old servant asked, going as far as the flight of steps before the door, with the young doctor. He may live for some time yet, or he may die tonight. The chances of life and death are evenly balanced in his case. I can't understand it at all, said the doctor, with a doubtful gesture. His mind ought to be diverted. Diverted? Ah, sir, you don't know him. He killed a man the other day without a word. Nothing can divert him. For some days Raphael lay plunged in the torpor of this artificial sleep. Thanks to the material power that opium exerts over the immaterial part of us, this man with the powerful and active imagination reduced himself to the level of those sluggish forms of animal life that lurk in the depths of forests, and take the form of vegetable refuse, never stirring from their place to catch their easy prey. He had darkened the very sun in heaven. The daylight never entered his room. About 8 o'clock in the evening he would leave his bed, with no very clear consciousness of his own existence. He would satisfy the claims of hunger and return to bed immediately. One dull blighted hour after another only brought confused pictures and appearances before him, and lights and shadows against a background of darkness. He lay buried in deep silence. Movement and intelligence were completely annihilated for him. He woke later than usual one evening, and found that his dinner was not ready. He rang for Jonathan. "You can go," he said. "I have made you rich. You shall be happy in your old age, but I will not let you muddle away my life any longer. Miserable wretch! I am hungry. Where is my dinner? How is it? Answer me." A satisfied smile stole over Jonathan's face. He took a candle that lit up the great dark rooms of the mansion with its flickering light, brought his master, who had again become an automaton, into a great gallery, and flung a door suddenly open. Raphael was all at once dazzled by a flood of light and amazed by an unheard-of scene. His chandeliers had been filled with wax lights. The rarest flowers from his conservatory were carefully arranged about the room. The table sparkled with silver, gold, crystal, and porcelain. A royal banquet was spread. The odors of the tempting dishes tickled the nervous fibers of the palate. There sat his friends. He saw them among beautiful women in full evening dress, with bare necks and shoulders, with flowers in their hair, fair women of every type, with sparkling eyes, attractively and fancifully arrayed. One had adopted an Irish jacket, which displayed the alluring outlines of her form. One wore the basquina of Andalusia, with its wanton grace. Here was a half-clad Diane the huntress, there the costume of Mademoiselle de la Vallière, amorous and coy, and all of them alike were given up to the intoxication of the moment. As Raphael's death-pale face showed itself in the doorway, a sudden outcry broke out, as vehement as the blaze of this improvised banquet. The voices, perfumes, and lights, the exquisite beauty of the women, produced their effect upon his senses, and awakened his desires. Delightful music, from unseen players in the next room, drowned the excited tumult in a torrent of harmony. The whole strange vision was complete. Raphael felt a caressing pressure on his own hand. A woman's white, youthful arms were stretched out to grasp him, and the hand was Aquilina's. He knew now that this scene was not a fantastic illusion like the fleeting pictures of his disordered dreams, He uttered a dreadful cry, slammed the door, and dealt his heartbroken old servant a blow in the face. "Monster," he cried, "so you have sworn to kill me," and trembling at the risks he had just now run, he summoned all his energies, reached his room, took a powerful sleeping draught, and went to bed. "The devil!" cried Jonathan, recovering himself. "And Mbianchon most certainly told me to divert his mind." It was close upon midnight. By that time, owing to one of those physical caprices that are the marvel and the despair of science, Raphael, in his slumber, became radiant with beauty. A bright color glowed on his pale cheeks. There was an almost girlish grace about the forehead in which his genius was revealed. Life seemed to bloom on the quiet face that lay there at rest. His sleep was sound, a light, even breath was drawn in between red lips. He was smiling. He had passed no doubt through the gate of dreams into a noble life. Was he a centenarian now? Did his grandchildren come to wish him length of days? Or, on a rustic bench set in the sun and under the trees, was he scanning, like the prophet on the mountain heights, a promised land, a far-off time of blessing? "Here you are." The words, uttered in silver tones, dispelled the shadowy faces of his dreams. He saw Pauline, in the lamplight, sitting upon the bed, Pauline grown fairer yet through sorrow and separation. Raphael remained bewildered by the sight of her face, white as the petals of some water flower, and the shadow of her long, dark hair about it seemed to make it whiter still. Her tears had left a gleaming trace upon her cheeks, and hung there yet, ready to fall at the least movement. She looked like an angel fallen from the skies, or a spirit that a breath might waft away, as she sat there all in white, with her head bowed, scarcely creasing the quilt beneath her weight. "Ah, I have forgotten everything," she cried, as Raphael opened his eyes. "I have no voice left except to tell you, I am yours. There is nothing in my heart but love. Angel of my life, you have never been so beautiful before. Your eyes are blazing, but come, I can guess it all. You have been in search of health without me, you were afraid of me. Well, go, go, leave me," Raphael muttered at last. "Why do you not go? If you stay, I shall die." "Do you want to see me die?" "Die," she echoed. "Can you die without me?" "Die. But you are young, and I love you." "Die?" she asked, in a deep, hollow voice. She seized his hands with a frenzied movement. "Cold," she wailed. "Is it all an illusion?" Raphael drew the little bit of skin from under his pillow. It was as tiny and as fragile as a periwinkle petal. He showed it to her. "Pauline," he said, "fair image of my fair life, let us say goodbye." "Goodbye," she echoed, looking surprised. "Yes. This is a talisman that grants me all my wishes, and that represents my span of life. See here, this is all that remains of it. If you look at me any longer, I shall die." The young girl thought that Valentine had grown light-headed. She took the talisman and went to fetch the lamp. By its tremulous light which she shed over Raphael and the talisman, she scanned her lover's face and the last morsel of the magic skin. As Pauline stood there, in all the beauty of love and terror, Raphael was no longer able to control his thoughts. Memories of tender scenes, and of passionate and fevered joys, overwhelmed the soul that had so long lain dormant within him, and kindled a fire not quite extinct. Pauline! Pauline! Come to me! A dreadful cry came from the girl's throat, her eyes dilated with horror, her eyebrows were distorted and drawn apart by an unspeakable anguish. She read in Raphael's eyes the vehement desire in which she had once exulted, but as it grew she felt a light movement in her hand, and the skin contracted. She did not stop to think. She fled into the next room, and locked the door. Pauline! Pauline! Cried the dying man, as he rushed after her. I love you, I adore you, I want you, Pauline. I wish to die in your arms. With unnatural strength, the last effort of ebbing life, he broke down the door, and saw his mistress writhing upon a sofa. Pauline had vainly tried to pierce her heart, and now thought to find a rapid death by strangling herself with her shawl. If I die, he will live, she said, trying to tighten the knot that she had made. In her struggle with death her hair hung loose, her shoulders were bare, her clothing was disordered, her eyes were bathed in tears, her face was flushed and drawn with the horror of despair, yet as her exceeding beauty met Raphael's intoxicated eyes, his delirium grew. He sprang towards her like a bird of prey, tore away the shawl, and tried to take her in his arms. The dying man sought for words to express the wish that was consuming his strength, but no sounds would come except the choking death rattle in his chest. Each breath he drew sounded hollower than the last, and seemed to come from his very entrails. At the last moment, no longer able to utter a sound, he set his teeth in Pauline's breast. Jonathan appeared, terrified by the cries he had heard, and tried to tear away the dead body from the grasp of the girl who was crouching with it in a corner. "What do you want?" she asked. "He is mine, I have killed him. Did I not foresee how it would be?" Epilogue. And what became of Pauline? Pauline. Ah! Do you sometimes spend a pleasant winter evening by your own fireside, and give yourself up luxuriously to memories of love or youth, while you watch the glow of the fire where the logs of oak are burning? Here, the fire outlines a sort of chessboard in red squares, there it has a sheen like velvet. Little blue flames start up and flicker and play about in the glowing depths of the brazier. A mysterious artist comes and adapts that flame to his own ends. By a secret of his own he draws a visionary face in the midst of those flaming violet and crimson hues, a face with unimaginable delicate outlines, a fleeting apparition which no chance will ever bring back again. It is a woman's face, her hair is blown back by the wind, her features speak of a rapture of delight, she breathes fire in the midst of the fire. She smiles, she dies, you will never see her any more. Farewell, flower of the flame. Farewell, essence incomplete and unforeseen, come too early or too late to make the spark of some glorious diamond. But, Pauline, you do not see, then. I will begin again. Make way. Make way. She comes, she is here, the queen of illusions, a woman fleeting as a kiss, a woman bright as lightning, issuing in a blaze like lightning from the sky, a being uncreated, of spirit and love alone. She has wrapped her shadowy form in flame, or perhaps the flame betokens that she exists but for a moment. The pure outlines of her shape tell you that she comes from heaven. Is she not radiant as an angel? Can you not hear the beating of her wings in space? She sinks down beside you more lightly than a bird, and you are entranced by her awful eyes. There is a magical power in her light breathing that draws your lips to hers. She flies and you follow, you feel the earth beneath you no longer. If you could but once touch that form of snow with your eager, deluded hands, once twine the golden hair round your fingers, place one kiss on those shining eyes. There is an intoxicating vapor around, and the spell of a siren music is upon you. Every nerve in you is quivering, you are filled with pain and longing. O joy for which there is no name! You have touched the woman's lips, and you are awakened at once by a horrible pang. Oh! Ah! Yes, you have struck your head against the corner of the bedpost, you have been clasping its brown mahogany sides, and chilly gilt ornaments, embracing a piece of metal, a brazen cupid. But how about Pauline, sir? What, again? Listen. One lovely morning at Tours, a young man, who held the hand of a pretty woman in his, went on board the Ville d'Angers. Thus united they both looked and wondered long at a white form that rose elusively out of the mists above the broad waters of the Loire, like some child of the sun and the river, or some freak of air and cloud. This translucent form was a sylph or a naiad by turns. She hovered in the air like a word that haunts the memory, which seeks in vain to grasp it. She glided among the islands, she nodded her head here and there among the tall poplar trees. Then she grew to a giant's height, she shook out the countless folds of her drapery to the light, she shot light from the aureole that the sun had lit about her face. She hovered above the slopes of the hills and their little hamlets, and seemed to bar the passage of the boat before the Chateau d'As. You might have thought that La Dame des Belles cousins sought to protect her country from modern intrusion. Well, well, I understand. So it went with Pauline. But how about Phoedera? Oh! Phoedera, you are sure to meet with her. She was at the Bouffon last night, and she will go to the opera this evening, and if you like to take it so, she is society. Addendum: the following personages appear in other stories of the human comedy. Aquilina Melmoth reconciled Bianchon, Horace Father Goriot the atheist's Mass, Caesar Birotteau the commission in Lunacy, Lost Illusions a distinguished provincial at Paris, a bachelor's establishment, The Secrets of a Princess, the government clerk's Pierrette, a study of women, scenes from a courtesan's life, Honorine the seamy side of history, a second home, a prince of Bohemia, letters of two brides, the muse of the department, the imaginary mistress, the middle classes, cousin Betty, the country parson. In addition, M. Bianchon narrated the following: Another study of women La Grande Bretagne Canalis, Constant Cyr Melchior, Baron de Letters of Two Brides, a distinguished provincial at Paris, Modeste Mignon. Another study of women, A Start in Life, Beatrix the Unconscious Humorists, the member for Arcis Dudley, Lady Arabella, The Lily of the Valley, The Ball at Co, The Secrets of a Princess, A Daughter of Eve, Letters of Two Brides, Euphrasia Melmoth, Reconciled Joseph, A Study of Women, Massol, Scenes from a Courtesan's Life, A Daughter of Eve, Cousin Betty, The Unconscious Humorists, Navarraines, Duc de A Bachelor's Establishment, Colonel Chabert, The Muse of the Department, The 13 Jealousies of a Country Town, The Peasantry, Scenes from a Courtesan's Life, The Country Parson, The Gondrevel Mystery, The Secrets of a Princess, Cousin Betty, Rastignac, Eugene de Father Goriot, a distinguished provincial at Paris, Scenes from a Courtesan's Life, The Ball at Co, The Interdiction, A Study of Women. Another study of women, The Secrets of a Princess, A Daughter of Eve, The Gondrevel Mystery, The Firm of Nucingen, Cousin Betty, The Member for Arcis, The Unconscious Humorists, Tale of Jean Frederick, The Firm of Nucingen, Father Goriot, The Red Inn. End of the Project Gutenberg ebook, The Magic Skin. Updated editions will replace the previous one. The old editions will be renamed. Creating the works from print editions not protected by U.S. copyright law means that no one owns a United States copyright in these works, so the Foundation, and you, can copy and distribute it in the United States without permission and without paying copyright royalties. Special rules set forth in the general terms of use part of this license, apply to copying and distributing Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol concept and trademark. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark, and may not be used if you charge for an ebook, except by following the terms of the trademark license, including paying royalties for use of the Project Gutenberg trademark. If you do not charge anything for copies of this ebook, complying with the trademark license is very easy. You may use this ebook for nearly any purpose, such as creation of derivative works, reports, performances and research. Project Gutenberg ebooks may be modified and printed and given away. You may do practically anything in the United States with ebooks not protected by U.S. copyright law. Redistribution is subject to the trademark license, especially commercial redistribution. Start. Full license. The full Project Gutenberg license. Please read this before you distribute or use this work to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol mission of promoting the free distribution of electronic works. By using or distributing this work, or any other work associated in any way with the phrase Project Gutenberg, you agree to comply with all the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license available with this file or online at www.gutenberg.org/license. Section 1. General Terms of Use and Redistributing Project Gutenberg Trademark Symbol Electronic Works 1.0. By reading or using any part of this Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work, you indicate that you have read, understand, agree to and accept all the terms of this license and intellectual property, trademark / copyright, agreement. If you do not agree to abide by all the terms of this agreement, you must cease using and return or destroy all copies of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works in your possession. If you paid a fee for obtaining a copy of or access to a Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work and you do not agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement, you may obtain a refund from the person or entity to whom you paid the fee as set forth in paragraph 1.e.8. 1.b Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark. It may only be used on or associated in any way with an electronic work by people who agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement. There are a few things that you can do with most Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works even without complying with the full terms of this agreement. See paragraph 1.c below. There are a lot of things you can do with Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works if you follow the terms of this agreement and help preserve free future access to Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works. See paragraph 1.e below. 1.c. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the Foundation or PGLAF, owns a compilation copyright in the collection of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works. Nearly all the individual works in the collection are in the public domain in the United States. If an individual work is unprotected by copyright law in the United States and you are located in the United States, we do not claim a right to prevent you from copying, distributing, performing, displaying or creating derivative works based on the work as long as all references to Project Gutenberg are removed. Of course, we hope that you will support the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol mission of promoting free access to electronic works by freely sharing Project Gutenberg trademark symbol works in compliance with the terms of this agreement for keeping the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol name associated with the work. You can easily comply with them